The sun had barely risen when the villagers gathered in the dusty courtyard, the air heavy with silence broken only by the shuffling of bare feet. Fathers gripped their daughters' shoulders too tightly, unable to meet their eyes. Mothers held back tears that trembled on their lashes. The auctioneer's voice rang out, loud and mechanical, calling for bids as though he were selling livestock, not children. One by one, girls were pushed forward. Hands trembled as they were inspected for strength and obedience. Some cried out for their mothers, others stood numbly, knowing no one would stop this. Desperation etched itself into every corner of the place. Parents whispered that they had no choice, there was no harvest, no money left, and at least this way their daughters might eat. Among them was Anaya, small for her age, her dress faded and torn. She tried to make herself even smaller, willing herself invisible. When men glanced at her, they frowned and turned away. Too skinny, too weak. No one bid. The auctioneer barely spared her a glance as he pushed her to the edge of the group, focusing on the girls who could fetch a decent price. The hours dragged on until the courtyard emptied, the sky turning the color of dying embers. Mothers collapsed in grief. Fathers walked away quickly, avoiding each other's eyes. The auctioneer began packing up his papers, muttering curses about wasted time. And Anaya sat alone on the cracked earth, hugging her knees to her chest. She didn't cry. She just stared at the ground, numb and quiet, the sound of the earlier bids still ringing in her ears. She wondered if she would sleep in the courtyard forever, unwanted and forgotten. There was nothing left to do, no one left to take her. The fear settled in her bones like cold. She was the last girl left, unsold at the auction that had swallowed her world whole. All she could think was that if no one wanted her, maybe she really was worthless. The sun slipped below the horizon. The wind picked up the dust around her. She closed her eyes and waited for the darkness to take her completely, unaware that someone, was about to change everything forever. As the sun sank behind the village huts, twilight cast long, lonely shadows across the courtyard. The crowd had thinned to nothing, their whispers fading into silence. Dust settled on the empty ground where children had stood only hours before, sold to the highest bidder. The once loud auctioneer grew quiet, his ledger closed, his voice hoarse from shouting prices for other people's daughters. But there was still one left. Anaya sat on the rough wooden platform, small knees drawn to her chest. She held the torn hem of her dress tightly in her fists, feeling the worn threads bite into her palms. Her hair clung to her tear-streaked cheeks in the cooling breeze, though she'd long since stopped crying. No one had wanted her. The auctioneer looked at her with mild irritation, not cruelty but weary indifference. He let out a heavy sigh, scratching his head as though wondering what he was supposed to do now. He'd been paid to sell the village girls. There was no plan for one left behind. Anaya dared a glance at him, searching his face for pity or answers. There was nothing there for her. He avoided her gaze, busying himself with his papers, pretending she wasn't even there. The courtyard was empty. Parents had left with money or with nothing, but all had left. Anaya heard the wind whistle through the dry fences, rustling discarded scraps of cloth. She was alone in the vast hush, surrounded by the echo of shouted bids that no longer mattered. She felt the coldness of abandonment fill her chest, pressing hard against her ribs. The day was over. The auction was over. She was the one no one had chosen, the one too weak to be useful, too small to be worth the price. She buried her face in her knees, trying to make herself invisible. But there was no one to see her at all. The world had emptied itself of mercy, and she was left behind to prove it. The silence was deep and heavy, like the air before a storm. Anaya sat motionless, her small figure swallowed by the emptiness of the courtyard. The auctioneer gathered his things without urgency, already half turned to leave when a sudden sound broke through the stillness, footsteps. Slow. Steady. Purposeful. Heads turned. A few lingering villagers paused mid-step. From the far end of the dusty path came an older man, unfamiliar to most. His coat was worn, patched at the elbows. His boots carried the wear of long days and long walks. A thin silver beard framed a weathered face, and his eyes, though tired, held a quiet strength. He walked past the auction platform without looking at the papers or the man running it. His eyes went straight to the girl. To Anaya. She looked up, startled by the sudden attention. He didn't stare like the others had, measuring, judging. He looked at her as if he already knew her story. As if it mattered. Without a word, he stepped closer and slowly knelt in the dirt so that he was eye level with her. No one had done that all day. Anaya blinked, unsure if she should speak. Her hands tightened around the edge of her dress, still trembling slightly. The man gave her a gentle smile, not the kind people use to fake kindness, but one that seemed to come from someplace deep and honest. "I heard there was one left," he said softly. "I came to see if she wanted to come home." The villagers around them watched in silence, confused. Some whispered. Others frowned. But no one moved. Anaya didn't speak yet. She just stared into his eyes, searching. Not for money, not for an offer, but for something she hadn't dared to hope for all day. Safety. Kindness. A place to belong. And in the stranger's warm, weathered eyes, she saw all three. The silence thickened as the older man rose from his knees, turning to face the auctioneer and the few villagers who remained to watch. Dust swirled around his boots, catching the last orange light of the setting sun. All eyes were on him now, waiting to see what he would say. He cleared his throat, voice steady but quiet enough that people had to lean in to hear. "I have no money to buy her," he announced, his gaze sweeping the courtyard. Murmurs rippled immediately, low and disbelieving. The auctioneer frowned, clutching his ledger tighter as if guarding the final failure of the day. "But I'll give her my name," the man continued, louder this time. "I'll take her as my own." Gasps and whispers burst from the crowd. Some scoffed. A woman shook her head and muttered that it wasn't proper. Another man asked under his breath if the old fool had gone soft. But the widower ignored them all. He turned back to Anaya, meeting her wide, tear-stained eyes. He didn't flinch at the sight of her ragged dress or the dirt on her cheeks. "I can't pay for her," he repeated, voice cracking with raw honesty. "But I can promise she'll never be sold again. She'll have a place at my table, a roof over her head, my name to protect her." The tension crackled like lightning waiting to strike. All eyes turned to the village elder, an old man with stooped shoulders and wise eyes clouded by years of sorrow. He stared long at the pair before him, the girl, small and shaking, and the man who offered everything he had left, his name. At last, the elder exhaled. His voice trembled as he spoke. "If the girl agrees," he said slowly, "then so do I." The murmurs fell away. The crowd watched, stunned and quiet. Hope flickered in the space between the girl and the man, fragile but real, lighting up the courtyard where only despair had been. Anaya sat frozen for a moment, eyes wide and shimmering with the last of her tears. The man's words still hung in the air like a promise she was afraid to trust. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if the broken little girl would dare say yes. He didn't rush her. He just held out his hand, palm open, steady and sure. His face was lined with years of sorrow but softened with something gentle, something she hadn't seen all day. Kindness. She swallowed hard, her thin shoulders trembling as she looked from his hand to his eyes. They were tired but honest. No tricks. No price. Slowly, almost shyly, she uncurled her fingers from the hem of her dress and reached out. Her small hand slid into his large, calloused one. He closed his fingers around hers carefully, like she was something breakable but precious. The auctioneer said nothing. The elder gave a single solemn nod. The onlookers parted silently, their faces unreadable. The man gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Ready?" he asked gently. She hesitated, glancing back once at the empty platform where she'd waited all day to be wanted. The cold, lonely space she would never have to return to. Then she turned away from it for good. "Ready," she whispered. Hand in hand, they walked out of the courtyard. The wind picked up the dust behind them, erasing their footprints as they left. The sky overhead deepened to indigo, stars just beginning to wake. And though the road ahead was uncertain, for the first time all day Anaya felt warm. She had no idea where they were going. But she knew she would never be alone again.